Hey guys, Mr. PF again. I'm going to show you guys some ps4 controller mods. As you can see, my controller already has ps3 sticks in it, but I'm going to show you guys the process today how to do it because the ones that I have are kind of beat up. I'm also going to show you guys how to throw a couple LEDs in there and hook them up to the vibration motors so that the LEDs turn on when the motor vibrates. So here I'm kind of showing you the difference between the ps4 style and the ps3 style joystick. You can see one's obviously taller than the other, but other than that, they're pretty much the same. And so if you try to put just the ps3 joystick right into the ps4 controller, the controller wouldn't be able to close and the joystick wouldn't move, it'd rub. And so for that fact, you have to cut it down a little bit. The reason behind this mod is I cannot stand the concave style joysticks that come in the ps4 controllers, and the dome style that are in the ps3 controllers are just so much nicer to me. So that's the idea behind this mod. So I'm going to go ahead and take my controller apart here, and then we'll get back to the modding. All you really need to take your controller apart is a nice Phillips screwdriver. If you don't know how to take your ps4 controller apart, there's a ton of good videos on how to do that, but you can kind of get the idea from watching me take it apart also in this video if you pay attention. All you have to do is tug on this to unplug the battery, and then right underneath the battery you're going to find a little Phillips screw that holds the motherboard in, and once you pull that screw out, basically everything else will pop out after that. Now if you go ahead and give everything a wiggle and kind of jiggle it around, you can get the motherboard and the joysticks to actually pop out of the controller. Sometimes you have to finesse it a little bit, but if you work on it, you'll be able to get it. And then also make sure that you pull the flap down and take the ribbon cable out for the touchpad so you don't yank that out or break it. So sometimes you have to fight a little bit, but you'll eventually get it out if you mess with it a little bit. Just don't pull on it or yank on it too hard. Once you get it out, just go ahead and move the faceplate to the side. And now you're just going to want to go ahead and take the caps off of the joysticks. So now you can go ahead and set the motherboard to the side. We won't need that for a little while. And so here I'm going to show you the difference between the two sticks. Both of these joysticks are actually ps3 joysticks. One of them I've already cut down. The other one is just a normal set of joysticks that hasn't been cut down. And then the one on the far right is an actual ps4 style joystick. So now we're going to take the one on the left, which is a ps3 style, and get it ready to cut so that way it will fit into a ps4 controller. So now you're going to take the ps4 and the ps3 joystick and go ahead and line them up. This is the way that I like to do it. Put them both on the top, and then I take a metallic Sharpie marker or whatever else you can find to mark it with, and go ahead and just give you a general mark so that way you know how much to cut off. Here I'm just going to run the Sharpie around it so that way I can see all the way around when I'm cutting it. Now I'm going to hop over to the garage and show you guys how I cut them. Here we are. I'm going to show you guys real quick in the garage how to cut them. Got the other one here. You can see I have it marked. Don't forget to bring your goggles because the plastic will fly off and hit you in your eye. So here we go. We're going to cut this piece off. I like to just kind of start on one side. Hold it with a nice pair of needle nails. And try not to do too much at a time because the plastic will start to melt if you get it too hot. I just like to rotate it like that inside the pliers. Turn again. These little chunks are best. You can see, got the bottom ring off, which will put me closer. You usually have all these extra pieces of plastic that are sticking up. You just kind of bust those off with your hand. Sandpaper can be useful too for something like this. So now that you have a majority of it off, you can see they're pretty much about the same height. They would probably fit in there now, but as you can see it's not very even and some of this might catch on there. So what I like to do is, this bit's kind of, you see the top of them, I'll just go around. Kind of flatten it out. So here I just switched over to a larger size cutting bit, and that's just going to allow me to flatten it more evenly. So now you can see the two are pretty much the same height. So now we're just going to repeat the same process that we did earlier and put the controller back together, but with the new joysticks instead of the old white ones. So now I'm just going to put the front half of the controller on and put the screw in just to test to see how the joysticks move around. When you're doing this, you're probably going to have to take it back apart a few times and sand or file the joysticks down repeatedly until you get the fit right to where the joysticks don't rub. I'm going to go a different route with this controller, so I'm just going to put it back together and show you how it looks and then take it back apart to show you guys the next step. When you're putting the controller back together, don't forget to push this ribbon cable through the piece of the controller before you put it all the way back together. Otherwise, you're going to have to take it back apart to do it anyway. You're also going to have to push the joysticks through the faceplate of the controller Don't worry about it, it's just because the face of the joystick is slightly larger than the PS4 joystick, so don't be afraid to give it a little push once you have everything lined up. So as you can see, the joysticks don't fit in there completely right. If I was going to put this controller together the way it is, I would take it back apart and file or sand those joysticks down further until they fit flush and move around like they should. But I'm going a different route with this controller. I'm actually going to modify the sticks a little bit further with a method I used to use on PS3 controllers. Then I'm going to put some LEDs behind them for a cool look. So now I'm back here and I'm going to completely remove the dust cover from the joystick. This actually just keeps stuff from getting into the controller, and it also just keeps the joystick from popping out of the controller by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that by using these little snips like I'm showing you, and cut little patterns into it, and then just go ahead and wiggle that plastic loose until it breaks out. So now that you have the whole dust cover removed, go ahead and take a small file or some sandpaper and go ahead and just smooth it all out so that way it's not rough. So now if you're going to go the LED route, once you have both joysticks finished, go ahead and put it back together, and now it should look like this. So here we are ready to put the LEDs in. As you can see, I'm using some 3mm LEDs. Mine are already pre-wired that I did earlier today. I put some heat shrink on them just to keep them from shorting out, and I have the wires on one of the LEDs on each side longer than the other so it can reach to the other side of the controller, and I'll show you what I mean by that here in a little bit. So you're going to have to play around with the LEDs a little bit to find a position that you like to set them in. I found right here inside between the rumble motor and the actual joystick itself they fit in nice, so I just like to put a little dab of hot glue and use a toothpick to kind of finesse them into the right spot. And just remember that you're going to have to leave enough room for the other LED on top of it, so try to push it down there in good ways, but also make sure not to kink the cable or bend it or break the cable also. So once you have the first LED in there, go ahead and put your second LED in there. Also a reminder to make sure to put your longest wired LED in first and your short wire LED in on top. That way you have the extra slack in the wires. So once you have them in a spot that's out of the way and that you like, go ahead and just put a little dab of hot glue to secure it. Make sure not to overdo it so that way the controller will close properly. Once I add a little bit of hot glue, sometimes I like to blow onto the hot glue pretty hard, not only to help it cool fast, but to try to force it into the controller so that way it doesn't puddle up on top. So now just go ahead and repeat that on the other side of the controller. And so now that once you're done with that, your controller should look something like this. So now I'm going to take my resistors. I can't for the life of me remember what resistance these were. They came with the LEDs that I bought. You could look them up if you really wanted to, but I'm too lazy for that right now. I know they'll work for this application, so I'm just going to go ahead and use them. If I remember correctly, the motors put out 3 volts, so the resistor value may be different for the LEDs that you were using, and you might be able to get away without even using a resistor just because the LEDs are only flashing for a small period of time, but it may reduce the life of the LEDs. So just for safety, I'm using some small resistors, so that way I don't have to yank the LEDs out and replace them. So now that I have my resistors tinned, I'm going to go ahead and trim them down a little bit. What you're going to want to do is take these resistors and put them on the positive leg of each rumble motor. You're also going to want to pay attention on how you position the resistors to make sure they don't short out on any of the other connections. So here you can go ahead and see how I positioned my resistors and see that I have both of mine already soldered into place. The nice thing about this mod is if you're not comfortable with soldering on the board, you could also tap the wires that are going to the motors instead of actually soldering on the board directly. So now I'm going to go ahead and gently bend the wires up towards the connections where the motors are and apply a slight amount of hot glue just to hold them there. And I stress slight amount because if you put too much, the controller will not want to close. Also be careful not to fold or bend the wires too hard because they will break, and then you'll have to go through the whole process of pulling the LEDs out and doing it all over again. Sometimes a dull piece of plastic or a toothpick can help get the wires into the right position. So now as you can see here, I have the long wires on one side folded up and the short wires on the other side folded up. I'm going to go ahead and expose the wires on both of these and twist the connections together. So sorry about the wire and the way I didn't notice it on the camera when I was doing it, but now I have both the wires of the light colors stripped, twisted together, and tinned and soldered. So what I'm going to do here is take a couple small button cell batteries and just test the LEDs to make sure that they're working properly before I make the final solder. So here's the left side all soldered up. I went ahead and added a piece of heat shrink so that way I can cover up some of the connections so it's not exposed and it won't short out on the other stuff. But I'm just showing you everything soldered up here. As you can see, the other side still has not been soldered yet. So now if you basically repeat that process that we did on the left side to the right side, you'll have what we have here in front of us, which is the completed project. What you're also going to have to do is take and trim a little bit of the battery compartment out so that way the wires can fit in and the battery will basically fit on top of that. You also are going to have to trim out some of the back side of the controller, otherwise they'll want to crush the wires and possibly ruin the connections. I'm showing you here some of the spots that I trimmed out on the back of my controller, but it could vary for your mods depending on where you run your wires and where it sticks out, where it doesn't stick out. So you just have to be wary of it when you're closing it, and you might have to take it on and off a couple times to get your fitment just right. Don't trim too much off first. So now once you have everything trimmed and fitting right, go ahead and put your controller back together the way you took it apart, and now you'll have a finished controller just like this here. So here we are back in my PlayStation. I'm going to show you guys how the controller looks when the controller is vibrating and the LEDs are going off. It's also kind of cool because certain games it will only vibrate red or blue, or sometimes both of them vibrate at the same time depending on what function is going on. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you liked it. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for some more mods.